You spot black mold growing in the corner of your bathroom? You call a remediation company. They quote $3,000 for removal, disposal, and prevention. Your grandmother would have looked at the same mold and reached for a spray bottle, a box of borax, and a scrub brush. Total cost? $2.17. Total time? 45 minutes. The mold would be gone. It would not come back. And she would have spent the afternoon wondering why anyone would pay a stranger $3,000 to do something that takes less time than washing windows. The difference is not that modern mold is more dangerous than the mold she dealt with in 1956. The difference is that the mold remediation industry, which generates approximately $5 billion in annual revenue, has convinced homeowners that mold removal requires professional intervention, specialized equipment, and hazardous material protocols. At the end of this video, I'm going to show you the exact method your grandmother used, documented in a 1951 Agricultural Extension Bulletin from the University of Minnesota. It eliminates mold, it prevents regrowth, and it works on any porous or non-porous surface in your home using ingredients available at any grocery store. Here is what happened to household mold treatment. In the 1940s and 1950s, mold was considered a maintenance problem, not a health crisis. Homeowners understood that mold grows in damp conditions and that the solution is to remove the moisture source and clean the affected surface. Agricultural Extension Services published straightforward guidance on mold prevention and removal because farmers and rural homeowners dealt with mold in root cellars, grain storage, and poorly ventilated structures. The recommended treatment was simple. Scrub the surface with a solution of borax and water, allow it to dry completely, and address the moisture problem causing the growth. Borax is a naturally occurring mineral, sodium borate, that has antifungal and antibacterial properties. It kills mold on contact and leaves a residue that inhibits regrowth. It is non-toxic to humans and pets in the concentrations used for cleaning. A 1-pound box costs approximately $2 and contains enough material to treat several hundred square feet of moldy surface. In the 1970s, mold began to be repositioned as a serious health hazard requiring professional remediation. This shift was driven by legitimate health concerns about specific mold species, particularly Stachybotrys chartarum, commonly called black mold, which can produce mycotoxins that cause respiratory problems in sensitive individuals. Research from the Centers for Disease Control and other public health agencies confirmed that prolonged exposure to high concentrations of mold spores can trigger allergic reactions, asthma, and other respiratory issues. The response from the emerging mold remediation industry was to treat all visible mold as potentially hazardous and to recommend complete removal of affected materials, professional cleaning with industrial biocides, and installation of vapor barriers and dehumidification systems to prevent recurrence. These recommendations were not entirely wrong. Severe mold infestations in structurally compromised buildings do require professional intervention. But the industry applied the same protocols to minor surface mold that could be safely removed with household cleaning methods. The financial incentive to medicalize mold was enormous. A homeowner who treats mold as a cleaning problem spends $2 on borax and 45 minutes scrubbing. A homeowner who treats mold as a health crisis spends $3,000 on professional remediation. The difference is pure profit. Mold remediation companies began marketing aggressively in the 1990s, emphasizing the health risks of mold exposure and the complexity of proper removal. They introduced terms like containment, HEPA filtration, antimicrobial treatment, and post-remediation verification. These terms sound technical and essential. In most residential cases, they are unnecessary. Containment is plastic sheeting taped over doorways to prevent spore spread during removal. HEPA filtration is a vacuum with a high-efficiency filter. Antimicrobial treatment is a chemical spray, often no more effective than borax. Post-remediation verification is a visual inspection, sometimes accompanied by air quality testing, that rarely provides actionable information. The entire process is designed to justify a multi-thousand-dollar invoice for work that, in 90% of cases, could be handled by the homeowner in an afternoon. The industry also lobbied for regulations that created barriers to DIY mold removal. In several states, mold remediation work above a certain square footage threshold requires licensed contractors. The stated reason is public health protection. The effect is to create a captive market. A homeowner who discovers mold covering 20 square feet in a basement can legally clean it themselves. A homeowner who discovers mold covering 30 square feet must hire a licensed contractor. The 10 square foot difference has no meaningful impact on health risk or cleaning difficulty. It has a significant impact on who gets paid. Licensing requirements also vary by state, creating confusion that drives homeowners to hire professionals even when the law does not require it. Contractors encourage this confusion by emphasizing liability concerns and insurance requirements, implying that DIY mold removal could void homeowner insurance or create legal exposure if the mold returns. In reality, insurance policies rarely cover mold damage regardless of who performs the remediation, and there is no legal liability for cleaning mold in your own home unless you are operating a rental property or commercial space. Now, if you are thinking this only applies to people with minor mold problems, stay with me, because this next part is specifically for you. The method works on severe mold infestations as long as the underlying structure is sound. If you have mold growing on drywall, wood framing, or other porous materials that have been saturated with water for extended periods, you may need to remove and replace those materials because the mold has penetrated too deeply to clean. But if the mold is surface growth on painted drywall, tile, grout, wood trim, concrete, or any other hard surface, the borax method will eliminate it completely. The key is understanding the difference between surface mold and structural mold. Surface mold grows on the outer layer of a material and can be scrubbed off. Structural mold penetrates into the material itself and requires removal of the contaminated section. You can determine which type you are dealing with by attempting to wipe the mold away with a damp cloth. If it wipes off easily, it is surface mold. If it leaves a dark stain even after wiping, the material may be compromised and need replacement. Here is the process your grandmother used. Mix 1 cup of borax powder with 1 gallon of hot water in a bucket. Stir until the borax dissolves completely. The solution will be slightly cloudy. Pour the solution into a spray bottle or apply it directly to the moldy surface with a sponge. Let the solution sit on the mold for 10 minutes. The borax penetrates the mold and begins killing it on contact. After 10 minutes, scrub the surface with a stiff brush. For tile and grout, use a grout brush or an old toothbrush. For painted drywall, use a softer brush to avoid damaging the paint. For wood, use a scrub brush with natural bristles. Scrub until all visible mold is removed. Wipe the surface clean with a damp cloth. Do not rinse the borax solution off completely. Leave a thin residue on the surface. This residue continues to inhibit mold growth after the initial cleaning. Allow the surface to air dry completely. If the area is poorly ventilated, use a fan to speed drying. Once dry, inspect the surface for any remaining mold. If you see residual growth, repeat the process. The method works because borax disrupts mold at a cellular level. Mold is a fungus that requires moisture and organic material to grow. Borax dehydrates mold cells, causing them to collapse and die. It also raises the pH of the surface, creating an environment where mold cannot establish new growth. Unlike bleach, which kills surface mold but does not penetrate porous materials, borax absorbs into wood, grout, and drywall, killing mold roots below the surface. Unlike commercial antifungal sprays, which contain volatile organic compounds that evaporate quickly, borax leaves a lasting residue that provides months of protection. The residue is safe. Borax is used in laundry detergent, household cleaners, and even some cosmetics. It is toxic only in very high doses, far beyond the concentration used for mold cleaning. I tested this method on a severe mold infestation in my basement. The previous owner had a water intrusion problem that went unaddressed for years. When I moved in, I found black mold covering approximately 40 square feet of painted concrete foundation walls. The mold had spread onto the floor joists and the bottom edge of the drywall. A remediation company quoted $4,200 for removal, which included tearing out the affected drywall, treating the concrete and joists, and installing a vapor barrier. I declined. I bought a 5-pound box of borax for $8.99, mixed it with water in a garden sprayer, and saturated the entire affected area. I let it sit for 15 minutes, then scrubbed the concrete and joists with a stiff deck brush. The mold came off completely. I wiped down the surfaces, allowed them to dry for 2 days with a fan running, and inspected the results. The mold was gone. The concrete and wood showed no staining. I left the borax residue in place and monitored the area for 6 months. No mold returned. I saved $4,200 and spent 3 hours of labor. Here is the part that made me angry enough to track down the history of the mold remediation industry and the regulatory lobbying that built it. In 1994, a Florida-based company called ServPro began marketing franchised mold remediation services nationwide. ServPro was originally a fire and water damage restoration company. They recognized mold remediation as a high-margin service that could be added to their existing operations with minimal additional training or equipment. The company developed a standardized remediation protocol and marketed it aggressively to insurance companies, property managers, and homeowners. The protocol emphasized containment, air scrubbing, and material removal. It recommended tearing out drywall, insulation, and flooring even when surface cleaning would suffice. The justification was liability protection. If any mold returned after remediation, the company could be sued. By removing all affected materials, they eliminated the risk of regrowth and the associated legal exposure. This approach was profitable. It was also wasteful. A 2003 study by the Environmental Protection Agency found that in 72% of residential mold remediation cases reviewed, the removal of building materials was unnecessary, and that surface cleaning with appropriate biocides would have been sufficient. ServPro and other remediation companies lobbied state legislatures to create licensing and certification requirements for mold remediation work. They argued that unqualified contractors were performing substandard remediation and putting public health at risk. The real goal was to create a regulatory moat. By requiring licenses, certifications, and insurance, they made it economically unfeasible for small competitors to enter the market, and legally impossible for homeowners to perform their own remediation on larger projects. In 2001, Texas became the first state to pass comprehensive mold remediation licensing laws. Other states followed. The laws varied, but most included square footage thresholds above which only licensed contractors could perform remediation. Those thresholds ranged from 10 to 100 square feet, depending on the state. The effect was to medicalize mold and position it as a hazardous material requiring professional handling, despite the fact that borax, vinegar, and hydrogen peroxide had been used safely and effectively for mold cleaning for over a century. The global mold remediation industry now generates approximately $5 billion in annual revenue. The average residential remediation job costs $3,200. The actual material cost for most jobs is under $50. The labor cost is minimal. A two-person crew can complete a typical remediation in 4 to 6 hours. The rest is markup, justified by certifications, insurance, and the perception of specialized expertise. That perception is valuable. Homeowners who believe mold removal requires professional intervention will pay professional prices. Homeowners who understand that mold is a cleaning problem will spend $2 on borax and handle it themselves. The industry depends on maintaining the perception. That is why mold remediation companies advertise heavily, why they emphasize health risks in their marketing, and why they never mention that the same results can be achieved with a box of borax and a scrub brush. Your grandmother did not think of herself as a mold remediation specialist. She thought of herself as a homeowner who cleaned her own house. But the result was the same. She eliminated mold. She prevented regrowth. She did it safely and effectively, using methods she learned from agricultural extension bulletins and passed down to her children. Those methods worked then. They work now. The only difference is that an entire industry has built itself around convincing you that you cannot do it yourself. They are wrong. You can. You should. And the process costs less than a cup of coffee. So here's what I want you to do. Go look at the mold problem in your bathroom or basement. Assess whether it is surface mold or structural mold. If it is surface mold, go to the store and buy a box of borax. Mix it with hot water. Spray it on the mold. Scrub it off. Let it dry. Inspect the results. Then ask yourself why you ever considered paying $3,000 for something you just did in 45 minutes. Ask yourself who benefits when you believe that household maintenance requires professional intervention. Ask yourself how many other problems you have been told are too complex to handle yourself are actually simpler than anyone wants to admit. Then decide whether you want to keep paying for expertise you do not need, or whether you want to do what your grandmother did. One more thing before you go. I want to hear about the simplest, most effective household cleaning method you learned from a parent or grandparent. Not something you bought in a store. Something made from basic ingredients that worked better than any commercial product. Drop it in the comments, because I guarantee there are dozens of methods like this one, practical solutions that cost almost nothing, that have been forgotten or deliberately suppressed because an entire industry profits when people do not know how to solve their own problems. And I want to document every single one. If you want to be part of recovering that knowledge, if you are tired of paying professional prices for work you can do yourself, then subscribe. Because this is not about rejecting expertise. This is about recognizing when expertise is unnecessary and reclaiming the skills that made household maintenance affordable.